I first heard about the show from them, and students were very positive and excited about it. So I actually hadn't watched the show until I was invited to participate in this panel, but I'd been hearing about it from my students, who, both Indigenous students and non-Indigenous students, who actually found the show very exciting and who really liked it. And so I think that that is something, given the kind of critique of the show that we've heard tonight, we might also want to think about what's appealing about the show. Why is it so appealing to hear such a relatively simple answer, and an answer that really makes sense to so many people so quickly? So when you have the story kind of laid out that Indigenous people are in poverty, it's easy to present, well, money must be the answer. And sort of, it was, I think, actually quite exciting, and kind of, not to speak ill of any of my students, and I hope so, I know some of them are here, so, but I think it's incredible, it's a huge relief. Like, it was very upsetting for the students I taught this year to learn the history of colonialism in North America. Many of them did not know about this history before, of colonialism in Canada and the dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their lands and the unreconciled nature of that relationship today. It was a relief to think, I think, watching the show, this could get fixed, like, and these other First Nations might be fine because they've worked out agreements to produce wine or to have the Olympics on their land. I mean, even, so I think that it's important to kind of recognize that appeal and to think about what a television show on CBC is really doing, right? Which is, shows are not going to get made that don't have some kind of broad appeal. So I would echo all of the comments about the sort of the problems with presenting this economic situation as the solution. So instead of talking more about that, which has already been really elaborated, I think, quite beautifully, another point that I think is worth really thinking about, especially for a group like ours, is the show's emphasis on just talking. So all you have to do is get to know your neighbor. You have to learn some Aboriginal history. Obviously, I'm a history professor, so I'm a proponent of learning history. I think it's very useful and important, but I actually thought it was a concern and problematic that the show kind of led us to believe if you could just meet, if a non-Aboriginal person could meet an Aboriginal person and they could talk a bit and you could learn about residential schools, it would all be fine. And that's not the case, right? So there's this sense that there's something healing and productive about learning about that past. And it's an important step, there's no question. And so there seems to me to be a strange paradox at the heart of the show, because for all of its focus on economics and development, it has a very, in a sense, kind of non-materialist answer. Its answer is we should just talk and get to know Indian peoples. It's not really asking the hard questions about whether settlers who benefit, like myself, are willing to take a material hit. What will it cost society, I suppose, to resolve these questions? Because these are material questions about poverty, that things are not going to be resolved with the status quo. And I guess the final example, I guess, in the last year for me that has given me the greatest pause in thinking about how we evaluate and how we understand whether hearing and knowing Indigenous peoples helps us on our own paths towards reconciliation and decolonization is a story from a recent research project I've been working on. And I was working with a woman who had spent close to 20 or 25 hours listening to an amazing elder narrate her life history, including her history of language loss to her community, the history of the Indian Act, discrimination, segregation, residential schools, all of the things that may be familiar to many of you here, talking about her own recovery and healing journey, a elder with incredible wisdom, also knowledge of her traditional knowledge and economy and resources. And I would have thought that if there was any relationship that was intimate enough to deconstruct somebody's colonial mindset, it would be sitting and listening and talking one-on-one to an elder for dozens of hours. And I know for a fact that this woman also believed that to be true of herself, that she was deeply sympathetic to the elder and empathetic to the cause of fighting injustice in her mind. It's also true that that same person who listened to those stories for all those hours after completing all of this discussion with this elder, wrote a newspaper article for a community paper that talked about how the community next to where this elder was from was an empty wilderness when settlers first came, and that it was so brave of the women who accompanied their husbands to enter the wilderness and leave civilization. And I think, to me, that's another real paradox, to think about how that kind of intimate discussion can take place and leave somebody's mind essentially unchanged, even though she herself probably sees that as invisible. So it's something that, for me, would cause me to constantly question my own certainties about what I know to be just and true, and I think is a story for everyone to remind us to ask that question of ourselves.
Thank you. Next up, last but not least, I'd like to welcome Chief Otis Jasper. He is Stolo. He is currently the elected Chief of Suwali First Nation and the President of Tsleil-Waututh Tribe Society. He has a degree from the First Nation Studies program at UBC and is currently pursuing an MBA at SFU in their new Aboriginal Business and Leadership program. Welcome.
Israel, my name is Otis Jasper. I'm the chief of the Suwali First Nation, elected chief. Also the president of the Tsimshian tribe, which is seven communities that make up the Tsimshian tribe in basically the Chilliwack Valley and Coulthard Lake Valley, down to the Fraser River. I think today is an amazing day. The room is filled. I'd like to thank Robin and Aaron for inviting me and allowing me to be able to have to share some of my thoughts today. You know, and I raise my hands to everybody that's here for coming out and taking the time to listen and to, you know, I'm sure have further dialogue after tonight. You know, when I think of the Eighth Fire and watching it, you know, I think it was great. So much about it, and doesn't go without criticism, but so much about the Eighth Fire was relevant to myself. So much of the stories of the different people, aspects and elements of their stories connected with myself and the journey that I've gone on personally. Growing up away from my community, 6 hours, basically another world away from my community. Not having a close connection to my family, my large family. And growing up kind of isolated in a settler community. Full of attitudes and stereotypes that were pushed on me. You know, the only media out there was the negative media, the stereotypes that were entrenched in everyone, including myself, because the education system definitely doesn't teach you anything in the K-12 system in the province. And the media doesn't, you know, bring any different story other than your bandana, First Nations, and you know, hooligans, drunks, whatever stereotype that that we've all come across. Those of us that have lived here. So when I watched that show and I listened to those stories, I found myself connecting to it and thinking back and remembering kind of where I've come from, the struggles I've had, many of my friends growing up. I played a lot of sports, organized sports, and it took me to many different places, and usually the only First Nations person on a team. And you know, through that, I also think many of my friends got to experience the treatment that a Native person gets. whether it's being pulled over by the police as we're walking down the road, and the police officer asking my friend, my non-native friend, if I was giving him any trouble. And we were just walking down the street, and basically taunting me to say anything back to him so he could take me downtown. Right? And so, you know, we can drive in our community and the police come through and pull us over just to check us out. Right? And being with some of my non-native friends, they're the ones arguing with the officer, but it's something that we're used to. And so there's different elements and aspects of the stories that really resonated with myself. You know, and I think when I think about this, there was 4 episodes, short episodes really, 45 minutes. You know, they covered a lot of issues, a lot of topics. I was worried at times that when they were raising the James Bay issue that they weren't going to show any of the other side of the story. They weren't going to show any part of the resistance from the community who resisted initially because they didn't want to lose their lands. They wanted to maintain their lands. And in the end, their leadership made an agreement where they lost their lands. And I think there's a lot more to those stories and a lot more issues that can be talked about and discussed. And that's why I'm very appreciative of tonight and this opportunity to have this sort of dialogue, because I think it needs to happen more. There needs to be more dialogue. It's so often, you know, now navigating my way through business and different entities within business, it's you come across a wide spectrum of people and a wide spectrum of knowledge, to little, to no knowledge, to interested, to genuinely interested. You know, there's those who just want to navigate the system, the policies that, you know, are in place from the province, right? The minimal policies that are in place. And it's a real challenge. I often find myself and some of my colleagues back home, my brothers and sisters, we find ourselves, can I steal what Ian left? We find ourselves always being the ones changing and adapting to the economy and to the way of business, and to meet the efficiencies of business. And often what that leaves behind is our communities and our families and the values and beliefs. And that's a slippery slope. And it's so great to you know, have the voices of Glen and Ian and others out there that are a good reminder of you know, what we need to keep in our minds and what we're actually working towards and working for. There's so many challenges back home. I think that the community members, the young people in my community, some have and many haven't heard of the 8th Fire, right? But those, it's one way of actually touching those community members, because what we do in the political world, in the business world, generally doesn't resonate with the young people. And that's one of the challenges that we face is connecting and you know, making things relevant with our young people. And not just our young people, but our community members who, you know, who are struggling from day to day to just make, you know, ends meet and feed their children. And I think, just to wrap up, because I know my time's coming short, again, I just want to thank everyone for being here. And I really want to, I think, put out a bit of a challenge, or I'd like to bring this kind of forum and setting back to Chilliwack, into the Stall territory, to have further dialogue like this. Perhaps we'll have a bit more time and maybe, you know, some more focus in some areas, but I really like this setting and look forward to maybe having the opportunity to chat some more. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much. Let's hear it for our panelists. Such a wealthy diversity of opinions and perspectives, and I'm really excited to hear the wealthy diversity of opinions and perspectives that I'm sure are sitting over here on this side of the room. One of the things that I had suggested to the organizers was that I noticed there weren't any youth on the panel. And I'm also noticing I don't think there's any elders on the panel. So we wanted to pose it to you to have youth and elders speak first today. So if you don't identify as youth, if you don't identify as an elder, just wait a few minutes. And I do apologize for those of you who aren't going to have your thoughts heard today, because we don't have room for everyone, just time limitations. But it's interesting because I think age is a little bit of a colonial concept, right? So I think it's really about your own identity, and maybe what you have been called by others, or what you identify as yourself. I don't identify as an elder, and I don't identify as a youth. I'm 32. I don't know if that helps you. So just listen to your own heart, you know, and what your truth is for that. Does that help you?
Yeah.
You're a grandpa, so you feel you want to identify as an elder. Awesome. So questions and comments are both welcome. Questions for the panel, questions for the entire group, comments, opinions, and did you want to go first? Is that, you're awesome.
I was just very much interested in the Indian Act, to abolish the Indian Act. I know when in 1980 or 1992, I think it was, when Trudeau had wanted the Aboriginal people asked to abolish the Indian Act, and he says, okay, I'll abolish it, but I won't replace it. And the Aboriginal people at that time, the elders of the people said that's really too hard, because we still need our hunting and fishing and land rights, and we still need to have the barrier between non-Indian peoples, because the people, the white people would automatically move into the reservation. There'll be a lot of block brother signs and all this and that. But I'm this guy. I just wanted to share that with you. And I watched the Eighth Fire. I only watched one, but I really appreciate it. And so this one guy, they were talking about, I don't remember which one I watched, but they were talking about this guy that was explaining what is the difference between Indian reservations and white people, and the guy says, well, we pay for them all. And I said, no, they didn't, because I think they sent British Columbia $11 billion annually, but in one place in our community up north, they take $11 billion away just from the logging industry, and that's really not fair.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask if there's somebody who identifies as a youth to go next. All right, we got somebody back here.
Hi, I'm Adrian. I'm in my early mid-20s, so I think I identify as youth. And I am a student at Santa Cruz University going for my bachelor's in health sciences. And I'd just like to say that I'm from the Cree Nation, from Alberta, Plains Cree, and I agree with a lot of things you guys say, and like, in a way I agree with Eighth Fire, but at the same time I don't. It's because like, as for myself, being First Nations, growing up in First Nations, I grew up with my culture, and I'm taking a minor in First Nation studies and taking a couple of First Nation courses last term. A lot of people call me closed-minded. It's because I was brought up traditionally. And sorry, I'm like really shaky. I can't. I'm learning to speak in public because I've always been scared. And
You're doing great.
I just like to, I don't know, it's really hard. It's because like even still today, we still face every single stereotype that's we brought up with, and we still face like everything. Like a month ago, I got called an immigrant for being on a SkyTrain. And like, I was just like, okay, I was here first. It's just like, I'm still always defending myself. I grew up with racism. I was only Aboriginal in a white school. You know, I grew up with it. I still fight for my culture. I still do everything. And like, you know, even people that are still young, that are still trying to find their way back to their culture, like, they're the ones that call me closed-minded. And I'm like, I'm only doing what I was taught and what I was told. And like going to school, like, yeah, sure, you want to like abolish the Indian Act, but like a lot of people think that what happens after you abolish the Indian Act? What's going to happen to our reserve? Like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Like, I don't know. There's like so many questions that run through my head, and there's so many like, I don't know, a lot of anger, and then like a lot of, you know, happiness from one side and the other. Like, I'm always constantly debating and debating, and I don't know. I think you gotta stop. I'm like shaking real bad. But
Thank you so much. Just to give everybody a clear idea, we have 19 minutes more. We've been talking for about 5 minutes. So if you can just be mindful of the time, but please share and take up the space. Now I saw 2 hands. Did you have a comment?
I have a question.
Okay, here you go.
I was just wondering why the Assembly of First Nations has never even considered the possibility of combining a mass effort by First Nations people to ignore or infringe every factor in every clause and subclause in the Indian Act and see what the result might be.
Because they're in colonial construction.
The AFN is an extension of the colonial framework. They were created by the Indian Act. To negate the Indian Act would be to negate the AFN. So as much as politically they'll, you know, shake their fist perhaps every once in a while, they're not going to do anything which fundamentally jeopardizes their income. Basically how that works.
Thank you.
I saw your hand, and Eugene's next, and then I see your hand. And then we're going to open the floor to everyone.
Masi Show. So this is a question for the entire panel. And I just wanted to say about the fires, I had really high hopes for it because, you know, I really like A Tribe Called Red and what they're doing with electronic music and the powwow. And I like the electric powwow t-shirts and stuff like that. But in my opinion, what 8Fire did was it further misrepresented contemporary Indigenous struggles. And I understand police harassment, racism, and alcoholism, and family violence. From as early as 6 years old, I could understand these concepts. But why it makes me so angry to see 8Fire further thrust Canada's status quo into false solutions and paradigms is because from where I left it, or where it left me, where I lost interest, is that it sort of left the problem at the feet of the public. While Canada's federal government is taking like measures to actively apply violent pressure and renewed concerted movement to further dispossess First Nations of land and title through all sorts of stuff like targeted cuts to NAHO, the Fisheries Act, the Environmental Assessment Act, stuff like that. So what does this imply as the next step for First Nations and settlers?
You can use the mic on the table also, if somebody wants to answer.
I'll take is this on? I'll take a stab at, I'll take a stab at this. I'm not totally sure if I'm going to answer your question, but I think as far as, you know, what I really feel like that there's a lot of issues that the 8Fire raises, and you can position on both sides, or, you know, somewhere in between a lot of the issues, and I think that's great, because I think that's going to further the dialogue, and really what I'd like to to ultimately see is, like I said, move this back into our communities so that locally back home we can have more of a dialogue with our local settler community. As well, I'd really hope that there's a next season, say of the 8th Fire, and there's some some more advisors and some more people that we can go into depth maybe in some of the areas to shed some more light on some of these issues, because I think there needs to be more and more dialogue. There's so much honest ignorance, if you will, out there that we need to create more discussions at kitchen tables of families, both native and non-native, to talk about the history and kind of where that's going to bring us today and into the future.
Thank you. And I think you were next.
I was amused when you asked for elders and you to speak first, because I was assuming you meant Aboriginal elders, and I thought, I surely am an elder, except that I don't think she's talking about me. I want to comment about 8th Fire. I've heard all your derogatory remarks about it. I enjoyed it, and I do think, bearing in mind that it was CBC producing it for, I am assuming, most non-Aboriginal audience, that much of the material in it, however each of you might despise it, would nevertheless come as a revelation to a lot of the people who were watching it. It might have been sort of, touching the tip of the iceberg. And to that extent, I think it was a good thing to do. Some of the issues I was quite familiar with, because I've taken them with an interest. But I think that their purpose was to be general education to a hitherto oblivious audience. So there would be a lot of people who at least knew a thing or two at the end of that, however limited that might be. The question that I wanted to raise was not about 8th Fire, but somewhere, probably from one of those conservative bastards in Ottawa, I heard this idea floated, which will not be new, that, to put it succinctly, the reserve land should become freehold. Let's put it that way. That it's now held communally. And at least I understand it's held communally. And I'm quite fearful about that. I don't think it's a solution for anything. I'm not proposing a solution, but I'd be interested in reaction of the people up there. I'm appalled that that's offered. The idea that you'll have a chunk of land which you can now flog on the open market, just like those 5 bastards do, is not any solution.
Responses? Maybe you can use the mic here.
I think that you're right, that we shouldn't see it as a solution, and I think thinking about, and this was my main point about it, I actually agree a lot with some of the ways in which contemporary cultural production is represented as a form of empowerment in the show. There's a lot of things that also resonated with myself. I want to specifically focus on the notion that we can reconcile our relationship, which is a colonial one, so there's the problem, through these market sort of means. And I'm saying that when we think that we can do that without giving up something profound, like our ethic, like the ethics of our relationship to land and others, for instance, then we need to hear more about this. And that is precisely one of the economic means that is being imposed and adopted by First Nations to further integrate themselves into market relationships with this promise of reconciliation. It's not the only one. Privatization of reserve lands, non-treaty agreements with industry, the comprehensive claims process, all of these things, the Indian Act, all of these things had that economic agenda in mind and utilized all of the worst aspects of Western society in order to facilitate that. Sexism, racism, unleashed sort of industrial productivism, like all of these sorts of things converge to facilitate that effect. So it's really great that people are seeing this with skepticism, that privatization, we have to think of it more. And it's not surprising that people like Flanagan are serving on this agenda with First Nations in order to develop their land in these very problematic sort of ways. But thank you.
So we have 10 minutes left for Q&A, and I had 3 hands. I had a girl over here, and I had a gentleman over here, and I had Wendy over here. So I'm seeing 3 more hands, and I think I'm gonna have to cap it at that. So I see, oh, yeah. Yay, thank you. Okay, so then I need a stacker to help me because I'm not gonna remember. So will you help me, Robin? So can everyone that just put your hand up again? So I saw you next, this person here with the beard, and then I think I saw you with the coat and the black hair, and then you with the other coat and the black hair. And then I saw you, and I saw you, you're second. And that's everyone, right? I'm gonna cap it there for now because that might fill up the full 10 minutes. Or 20 minutes, but if we have more time than that, we'll add more.
Back here, this is going to be tough, so maybe back can be locked up without it.
Okay, maybe we can pass it down.
So, given all the negatives of the Indian Acts, but also trying to address the concerns of the first two speakers, what type of relationships or legislation or anything like that, any possibility I haven't thought of as well, would you like to see in place of that type of legislation, if you have any ideas?
Yeah, great question, and it's certainly one that has been occupying the minds, I think, of the Indigenous peoples. I think since the white paper that was mentioned earlier, that was introduced by Pierre Trudeau in '69. And I'm going to explain it in terms of my own experience, because as an undergraduate, I learned to be anti-Indian Act right from the get-go, as soon as you start reading it and realizing that it's not written for Indians, by Indians, or even about Indians, and it's very much about the annihilation of our identity. I then went to my father to find out why in H-E-L-L, because there's children here. Oh, she can probably spell. Did we fight to keep it when Trudeau and Chrétien were putting forward this idea of abolishing it? And so what my father explained to me, and what I've also come to understand, is the reason that we fought to keep it, because at least it was some form of legislation that acknowledged us as the unique, as the original people of this land. So how I have then come to understand it is that it means so much to us as Indigenous peoples to retain our identity, to retain our connection to our territories and to our lands, that we would rather live under the most oppressive piece of legislation Canada has ever put forward than to relinquish that identity and that connection to land. So then the next question, of course, in your head, of course, of a lot of Canadians is, well, what do we replace it with? And in my opinion so far, and I'm new to starting to figure out what to replace it with, it's not going to be a single act. There are so many different Indigenous groups across the country, each with their own unique ways of governing who they are and their connection to territory, to spirit, to ancestry, to cultural teachings, and so on, all the things that make us what we call Homo people. That it will probably be a number of different types of what we'll term legislation, or a form of constitution, some sort of formal agreement as to how we will govern ourselves and live in partnership with the settlers. So for example, for the Stalo, we of course have our unique ways, which are very different from the Métis, which are very different from the Cree, from the Anishinaabe, and so forth. So it certainly will not be a cookie-cutter approach, and I imagine it will entail every single nation across the country developing its own. I'm very much aware that this is his actual area. He's already done all the work. I'm just starting.
I'd like to take a stab. I think, you know, for me, I'm all for abolishing the Indian Act completely, like just hands down. But that's only part of the equation. You have to abolish the culture of colonialism that dreams this shit up, basically, and that maintains it. So when you're looking at abolishing the Indian Act, you have to abolish colonialism along with that. And I'm down with that. And I think that that's really what the focus and intent of pretty much everybody up here is all about, because that's what we're struggling with. And that is the centrality of what the Eighth Fire is actually about, is that how do we exist in a colonial relationship? And this is how we exist in a colonial relationship. We have unequal access to power and application of power. We have privilege supported by the threat of violence. And that is the relationship that we find ourselves in today. And the Indian Act is just a small manifestation of that. It's almost insignificant compared to the day-to-day actions that we have to live through. So that's how that works.
Hi, my name is Eduardo, and I wanted to thank the organizers for bringing this all together this evening. This kind of forum is extremely important, and I totally agree that it needs to happen in other communities, other settler communities, especially those that are close to other First Nations communities as well. This type of dialogue is super, super important. Especially myself being an immigrant as well, how we were schooled, you know, coming to Canada. I mean, hardly anything about local community history, let alone anything that was really relevant in terms of First Nations, local First Nations history. All we were taught about was the fur trade, and this is coming back from Ontario. Really a lot of irrelevant, erroneous history in our education system. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, also in terms of when you know, we talk about the settler communities, also new people that continue to keep coming over, as well as immigrants, to get a better understanding of the issues here. And so that for me raises the issue around treaty making. I'd like to get a better sense from the panelists around how you feel about the current treaty making process. I've been spending time with some of the nations on the coast and on Vancouver Island, both elected and traditional leadership, and especially those that have gone down the treaty making process and have left it, or are in very much like a great deal of debt. It's a resource suck, it seems to me. It's a time suck, and it creates a whole host of problems. That's sort of the perception I've been getting, and spending time with folks, and I'd love to get your ideas on the whole treaty making process and what the way forward is.
I could just answer purely like what it's supposed to do, and then I'll leave it up, like we can leave it up to the audience to kind of, like it's stated quite clearly, what is called the treaty process. It's not really, they're not really treaties. They are constitutionally protected, but they in no way signify a relationship that is negotiated under equal terms, which is flexible enough to govern relationships in a reasonable way in perpetuity. For instance, it's not about that. In 1973, when the comprehensive land claims process was established, it was established in response to a number of things. The first was a rise in Indigenous militancy and anger around the proposed abolishment of the Indian Act, which amounted just to a form of legal assimilation by the Trudeau government, so the white paper. It was in response to rising militancy among my community, the Dene of the Northwest Territories, over a proposed pipeline, the original Mackenzie Valley pipeline, and our struggle there. The struggle of the James Bay Cree over the hydroelectric projects that had promised to dam their homelands and destroy their way of life. And then also two legal decisions, one being the Coulthard decision, which kind of stated that there were these things called Aboriginal land rights. They predate Canadian sovereignty and they're a burden on the Crown to address. And the same in the Northwest Territories with the Paulette decision, kind of opening up the land question. So those are what compelled the federal government to act in this area. And they established the comprehensive land claims to get rid of those questions. So the comprehensive land claims actually recognize Aboriginal land rights in order to originally get rid of them, and now in a turn of kind of just magical semantics, just push them away so we never actually have to deal with them again. So we can contain what Aboriginal people's rights are, what the state has to abide by in terms of those rights, and it's through that process that we get certainty over who owns what and what the rules are that governs that territory in question. And why is certainty important? Because without certainty, you don't get the type of investment that this state depends on in order to keep accumulating capital. So it's supposed to create the economic environment to further develop, gain investment in Indigenous people's lands. So that's what it's about. So whether or not you want to, or think that you can position yourself within that system in ways that might facilitate empowerment, that might facilitate true economic self-determination, that being like you determining what types of development is going to go on your land, you determining as communities like collective sort of decision-making over those processes, even at the site of work. If you can think that you can go about negotiating that, I can tell you that you will not be able to. It is counter the purpose of the process itself. And you look at the history of my community in the Dene Nation, we actually tried to negotiate that. And it was firmly rejected because of two things. It presumed that we had ultimate jurisdiction over our territory, so it challenged the racist assumption of sovereignty over us, by, imposed on and just assumed from the state. And we challenged what both the Northwest Territories and Canada called a free market model of development. And they said no, and we were not allowed, or we couldn't proceed along those lines anymore. So